Good evening and welcome once again to Religion on the Line. This is Van Hale, and I will be host of the program this evening. Bill Forrest, as I mentioned last week, is on a little vacation over spring break, and so he will not be with us this evening, but I do have sitting in Bill's seat this evening James White, and we will be discussing several topics. Who knows where all this might go, particularly when we invite your participation. Let me just lay a little a ground rule or two for this evening's discussion insofar as the callers are concerned. I don't really care what it is that you want to talk about, or if your feelings are strong or mild, or your language strong or mild, that's fine. But I do want to request that you direct your questions or comments this evening to topics which could be addressed by our guest James White and myself. So if you have some comment on some previous program or want to carry on a discussion of something that we've discussed over the past few weeks, let me invite you please to put that off until our next program, when we will have an open discussion and you can pursue whatever topic you would like to choose. This evening we're going to be talking about, I would say, the differences between my point of view, which basically comes out of my LDS perspective, and the point of view of James White, which comes basically, I believe, out of the position of the Protestant Reformation. And so we'll be discussing what I consider to be some of the, not just myself, but I'm sure what James and I would both consider to be some of the significant differences of theology and doctrine between these two different points of view. And I think to start with, let me just mention that James White is the director of Alpha and Omega Ministries, and he comes up here frequently, I guess twice a year.
Twice a year. In fact, it's somewhat of an anniversary. This is the 20th consecutive General Conference that I've been to and passed out literature at. So starting the second decade now.
And you have a publication that you put out?
Well, if you're referring to Prospologion, our theological journal, we put that out on a semi-regular basis. You know how that works.
Yes, I do.
And also I'm the author of Letters to a Mormon Elder, a Bethany House publication that is currently out from Bethany House, and actually I'm getting a lot of letters from Utah on Letters to a Mormon Elder. It seems to be doing quite well up here.
Okay, this evening we're going to be talking about, I thought maybe just to start with, I would throw out a couple of ideas, and we'll just kind of draw the distinction between your point of view and my point of view on a few topics to lead us into our discussion this evening. First of all, it seems to me that one of the most substantial differences that leads to a number of other differences between our two theologies is the question of the absolute omnipotence of God.
Right.
And in reference to that, I'm referring to the idea of creation out of nothing, creation ex nihilo. And what is your position? Did God create everything out of nothing?
Well, and I think it goes a lot farther than just simply creatio ex nihilo, the idea that God has full creative power, that he is omnipotent in the sense of having the power to create out of nothing all matter, whether spirits or a rock or whatever it might be. I think it goes far beyond that, even to the entire theology of God. That's what underlies the major difference, obviously, as I've always said, between Mormonism and what I view as historical Christianity, is that in Christian thought, God is absolutely and totally unique, that he is immutable, unchangeable, and that he is absolutely perfect, and obviously perfection and changeability being, in my thinking, two things that cannot go together. And so what I feel anyway should be one of the major objections raised by evangelicals, Reformed individuals such as myself against Mormonism should focus upon the nature of God. And Van, you've looked at Letters to a Mormon Elder, and you know that that is really one of my strong emphases, is who God is, because many of the conversations we get into the gospel, which hopefully we'll do this evening, as you recognize, the fundamental differences there go back to very different viewpoints in regards to who God is and then how that fits into what God's purpose in this world is, what man's ultimate destiny is, what man's purpose is. It all comes back to who God is, and that's why I think that should be the primary area of inquiry at first when two people are attempting to communicate on these issues. But how often is it? At least in my experience, Joseph Smith or something becomes discussed much earlier than some of the fundamental issues.
Well, I don't know that Joseph Smith is not maybe the most fundamental issue, but when we get into theological discussions, the question of whether of the omnipotence, the absolute omnipotence of God is of course the starting point,
right.
At least as I see it. And my thinking on that particular point would be, I think, in line with traditional LDS thinking, and that is that God did not create everything from nothing, but God is an organizer, and creation in an LDS definition would have reference to the organization of matter rather than to the creation out of nothing. Whatever position you take on that, I think leads to another, takes you down, I think, two different roads. And for example, in the question of salvation, which of course is one of the areas in which we would, I think, diverge significantly. In the area of salvation, my question would be to you, to bring out maybe the difference between us on this point, is do you feel that does man have any responsibility in his own salvation?
Does man have any responsibility? If you mean by that, is man able to bring about his own salvation, or is man put in a situation where salvation is merely offered to him and then it is up to him whether he brings about his own salvation or not? Obviously, I would say that man, being dead in sin, is not capable of saving himself, and that outside of regeneration, man is incapable of doing anything that is pleasing to God, in line with Romans chapter 8, verses 5 through 9, and many other passages. When you use the term responsibility, God has created man in such a way that man does what his will decides to do, and the will acts upon the desires that are presented to the will by the heart.
Well, when you say the will, are you talking about the man's will or God's will?
I'm speaking of man's will. That man's will makes decisions based upon the desires that are presented to the will by his personality, by his heart. And I believe that outside of regeneration, as the Scripture